The streets of New York were bustling on that cold autumn afternoon. The sharp wind howled through the alleyways, swirling dried leaves across the cracked asphalt. Among the rows of red brick buildings and old storefronts, an elderly woman walked carefully, clutching her purse tightly to her chest. Her name was Mabel Lancaster, a 78-year-old widow known for her kindness in the neighborhood. But she was never alone. By her side, always alert, walked Gunnar, a German shepherd with a poised stance, piercing eyes, and a past few knew about. Across the street, leaning against a rusty lamppost, Rowan Carter watched the old woman with restless eyes. His black hoodie concealed part of his tattooed neck, and his hands twitched inside his pockets. He needed money, fast. The last few days had been a disaster, and he was desperate. Then he saw Mabel. Small, fragile, distracted. Easy. Without a second thought, he crossed the street quickly, pulling his hood further over his face. As Mabel turned the corner, Rowan grabbed her purse and yanked it hard. The elderly woman let out a startled cry, struggling to hold onto it, but the force knocked her off balance, and she fell to her knees on the cold pavement. Her heart pounded, fear shooting through her like an electric current. But Rowan was determined. He pulled again, ready to run. Then he heard a sound that froze his blood. A deep, low, menacing growl, like distant thunder rumbling just beneath the surface. Rowan looked down and locked eyes with Gunnar, whose stare was sharp as knives. The German shepherd had stepped between him and Mabel, ears erect, body rigid. A chill crawled up Rowan's spine. Still on the ground, Mabel lifted her head and spoke in a firm, unwavering voice. "Gunnar, attack." Rowan barely had time to react. What happened next left everyone on the street in shock. Rowan barely had time to process what was happening before Gunnar lunged. The German shepherd moved with terrifying speed, his powerful muscles coiling like a spring before launching forward. Rowan instinctively tried to jump back, but it was too late. With a deep, guttural snarl, Gunnar clamped his teeth onto Rowan's sleeve, pulling him off balance. The force of the impact sent Rowan staggering backward, his feet slipping against the pavement. Panic surged through his chest as he struggled to break free, but Gunnar's grip was relentless. "Call him off," Rowan shouted, his voice cracking with fear. Mabel slowly got to her feet, brushing dust off her coat. She adjusted her glasses, her piercing blue eyes locking onto Rowan with an expression that was anything but frail. "You made a mistake, boy," she said coldly. Rowan gritted his teeth, yanking his arm violently in a desperate attempt to shake off the dog. His heart pounded as he reached into his pocket, fingers fumbling for the switchblade he always carried. He didn't want to use it, not really, but if this dog didn't let go. Gunnar growled even louder, sensing Rowan's hesitation. He wasn't just any dog. He was a trained former K9, a veteran of years in law enforcement. He could read people, sense fear, aggression, guilt, and right now he knew Rowan was dangerous. Before Rowan could react, Gunnar shifted his stance, releasing Rowan's sleeve only to slam his front paws against his chest with a brutal force. The impact sent Rowan crashing to the ground, his back slamming against the cold pavement. The air rushed out of his lungs in a painful gasp. By now, people on the street had started to notice. A few pedestrians stopped in their tracks, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. A man across the street pulled out his phone, aiming it directly at Rowan. "Someone call the cops," a woman yelled. Rowan's mind raced. If he didn't get out of there now, he was screwed. He couldn't go back to jail, not again. His pulse pounded as he tried to push himself up, but before he could move, Gunnar planted a paw firmly on his chest and let out a sharp, authoritative bark. A warning. Mabel took a step closer, looking down at Rowan with an eerie calmness. "I suggest you stay down, son," she said. "He doesn't take kindly to criminals." Rowan's breaths were ragged, his eyes darting between the old woman and the dog. His entire body tensed as the distant sound of sirens pierced the air. He had to make a choice, and fast. Rowan's pulse pounded in his ears. The distant wail of sirens grew louder with each passing second, echoing through the streets like a countdown to his fate. Gunnar's piercing stare held him in place, the dog's deep growl vibrating through Rowan's chest like a warning from something far beyond just an animal. He had to think fast. His body tensed as he tried to assess his options. The crowd around them had grown. Pedestrians murmured, some filming, others whispering among themselves. A couple of them shook their heads, probably thinking he got exactly what he deserved. Rowan clenched his jaw. He'd been in tough situations before. He could get out of this. His fingers twitched toward his pocket, where the switchblade sat, cold against his palm. But just as he considered his next move, a voice cut through the chaos. "Don't even think about it." Mabel's words were sharp, unwavering. She had seen his hesitation, the subtle shift in his body as he weighed his options. Her blue eyes locked onto his with a knowing intensity, like she had dealt with men like him before. Gunnar didn't move, but Rowan could feel the weight of the dog's presence. Ready? Waiting. One wrong move and that K9 would tear him apart. The sirens were close now. Too close. Red and blue lights flickered in the reflection of a store window. Rowan cursed under his breath. He knew what would happen if the cops got their hands on him. Another charge, another trip to Rikers. He couldn't let that happen. Desperation flooded his mind, and in a sudden burst of movement, he twisted his body, attempting to break free. But Gunnar was faster. The second Rowan moved, the German Shepherd lunged. Not with teeth this time, but with sheer force. The impact knocked Rowan sideways, slamming him hard against the pavement. The wind shot out of his lungs in a painful gasp. The crowd reacted with gasps and murmurs. A woman let out a nervous laugh. Someone else clapped. Mabel stepped forward, adjusting her coat. She knelt down slightly, just enough to look Rowan in the eye. "You really thought you could take advantage of me?" she asked, her voice calm but cutting. "You should have picked someone else, son." Rowan's chest heaved as he glared up at her. He wanted to spit out some smart remark, but his breath was still struggling to return. The first police car screeched to a stop at the curb. Two officers stepped out, hands already on their belts. And just like that, Rowan knew. He was out of time. The red and blue lights flashed in Rowan's peripheral vision, painting the pavement in streaks of color. The low hum of the police radio crackled as the officers stepped forward, their heavy boots thudding against the sidewalk. "Hands where we can see them," one of the cops ordered, his voice firm and commanding. Rowan's mind raced. His entire life had been a cycle of bad choices, but this, getting taken down by an old woman and her dog in front of a growing crowd? This was rock bottom. Gunnar still stood over him, his deep brown eyes locked onto Rowan like he could see right through him. There was no growling now, just pure control, like the dog knew the fight was already over. Rowan slowly raised his hands, his breathing heavy. His body ached from the hits he had taken, but his pride hurt even more. The older officer, a stocky man with graying hair, exchanged a look with Mabel. His name tag read Sergeant Calloway, and the way he stood told Rowan he had seen plenty of punks like him before. "Mabel, you all right?" Calloway asked, his voice softer when speaking to her. She nodded, brushing off her coat as if this were just another minor inconvenience in her day. "I'm fine, but this one," she gestured to Rowan, thought he could take what wasn't his. The younger officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man, pulled out his cuffs. "Stand up," he ordered. Rowan hesitated. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to run, to fight, to do anything but let those cuffs close around his wrists. But Gunnar didn't budge, and Calloway was already reaching for his radio. Rowan clenched his jaw. He had no choice. Slowly, he got to his feet. The younger officer grabbed Rowan's arm and twisted it behind his back. The cold steel of the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, sending a final jolt of reality through him. "You got any weapons on you?" Calloway asked. Rowan didn't answer, but the younger cop reached into his pocket and pulled out the switchblade. He held it up, shaking his head. "Not the brightest move, kid." The weight of everything crashed down on Rowan at once. The stares from the crowd, the humiliation of being bested by an old woman, the fact that he was about to spend another night in a jail cell. And then Mabel stepped closer. For a moment, Rowan expected her to gloat, to smirk, to tell him he got what he deserved. But instead, she simply looked at him, really looked at him. "What happened to you, son?" she asked, her voice softer now. Rowan's throat tightened, but he said nothing, because for the first time in a long time he didn't have an answer. Rowan kept his eyes on the ground, Mabel's words echoing in his head. "What happened to you, son?" It wasn't an insult. It wasn't a lecture. It was a real question, one he didn't know how to answer. The younger cop pulled at his arm, urging him toward the patrol car. But for the first time, getting arrested wasn't what bothered him the most. It was that damn question. Sergeant Calloway turned to Mabel, adjusting his belt. "You want to press charges?" Rowan tensed. He had been in this situation before, but something about this time felt different. Maybe it was the humiliation of being taken down by an old woman and her dog. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him. Not like a criminal, but like someone who had made a mistake. Mabel exhaled sharply, glancing at Gunnar, who sat patiently by her side. The dog no longer growled, no longer needed to. "No," she finally said. Rowan's head snapped up, his pulse quickening. "What?" Even the younger officer hesitated. "You sure?" he asked. "He tried to rob you." Mabel's voice was steady. "Locking him up won't fix anything." Rowan wanted to scoff, to act like he didn't care, but his throat tightened. No one had ever done this for him before. People always saw him as trouble, a lost cause. Yet here she was, choosing to let him go. Calloway sighed. "All right, but he was carrying a weapon. We can still hold him on that." Mabel studied Rowan again, then asked, "You got somewhere to be tonight?" The question hit harder than he expected. He hesitated, looking away. Mabel sighed, almost like she already knew the answer. "Let me talk to him," she said. Calloway frowned but gave her a nod. She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "You're standing at a crossroads, boy. Keep going this way and you'll end up dead or in prison. But I'm giving you an out." Rowan swallowed hard. "Why do you care?" he muttered. Mabel's eyes didn't waver. "Because once upon a time, someone cared about me when I didn't deserve it either." Rowan felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Hope, and it scared the hell out of him. Rowan shifted uncomfortably, his hands still cuffed behind his back. Mabel's words lingered in his mind, gnawing at something deep inside him. Someone cared about me when I didn't deserve it either. He had spent his whole life believing that no one gave a damn about him, that he was just another lost cause. But this old woman, the one he had tried to rob, was standing in front of him, offering something no one else ever had. Sergeant Calloway exhaled, crossing his arms. "Mabel, what exactly are you suggesting?" She didn't hesitate. "Let him go." The younger officer scoffed. "Ma'am, he had a weapon. But Mabel raised a hand, silencing him. "And where will that get him? Another night in a cell? Another charge on his record? You think that's gonna change anything?" Rowan's jaw tightened. He wanted to believe she was wrong, that he didn't need help, that he could handle himself. But the truth was he had nowhere to go. No home, no family, nothing but the streets and whatever trouble found him next. He glanced at Gunnar, who still watched him closely, his intelligent eyes studying every twitch of Rowan's muscles. The dog knew. He saw through him just like Mabel did. Calloway shook his head. "You're really serious about this?" Mabel nodded. "I've got a spare room, and he's gonna work for it. Chopping wood, fixing up the house, whatever I say. That's the deal." Rowan frowned, confused. "Wait, you're offering me a job?" He almost laughed, but something about the way she looked at him made the words die in his throat. The officers exchanged glances. It was unconventional, even crazy. But Mabel Lancaster wasn't just some naive old woman. She had lived long enough to know that some people didn't need punishment. They needed a reason to change. After a long pause, Calloway sighed. "Fine, but if he screws up, it's on you." Mabel turned back to Rowan, eyes sharp. "So what's it gonna be? Kid? Jail? Or a second chance?" Rowan swallowed hard, his whole life balancing on that single decision. He had spent years running, fighting, surviving. But for the first time, someone was giving him a real choice. and he had no idea what to do with it. Rowan's throat felt dry. He stared at Mabel, trying to read her face, searching for any sign that this was some kind of trick. A second chance? No one had ever offered him that before, at least not without wanting something in return. His instinct screamed at him to laugh it off, to call her crazy, to pretend he didn't care. But deep down, he knew the truth. If he walked away from this, he had nothing. Sergeant Calloway shifted impatiently. Well, what's it gonna be? The cold metal of the cuffs pressed into Rowan's wrists, grounding him in the moment. He glanced at Gunnar, still sitting like a silent judge, his ears perked, his deep brown eyes locked onto him. The dog had already taken him down once. Rowan had no doubt he could do it again if needed. Finally, Rowan exhaled, dropping his head slightly. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll take the deal." The younger cop rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath, but Calloway gave a small nod. "All right, your call, Mabel." He pulled a key from his belt and stepped forward, unlocking the cuffs with a quick metallic click. The sudden release made Rowan's arms feel weightless, but not free. Not yet. Mabel adjusted her coat, unfazed by the tension still hanging in the air. "Good choice, kid. But don't think this means I'm gonna go easy on you." Rowan scoffed, rubbing his wrists. "Yeah, I figured." He wanted to sound indifferent, but the truth was he had no idea what he was walking into. Living with a sharp-tongued old woman and her attack dog? Definitely not part of his plan. Calloway gave Mabel a long look. "You sure about this?" he asked one last time. She nodded. "I can handle him." There was something in the way she said it. Complete confidence, no hesitation. For some reason, that unsettled Rowan more than anything else. The patrol car's engine rumbled to life as the officers prepared to leave. Before stepping into the vehicle, Calloway turned back. "Don't make me regret this, Carter. Next time, there won't be a choice." Rowan swallowed hard but said nothing. As the car pulled away, he felt a strange mix of relief and dread. He wasn't going to jail, but now he was in Mabel Lancaster's hands. And something told him she was going to be tougher than any cell he'd ever sat in. Rowan sat stiffly in the passenger seat of Mabel's old pickup truck, arms crossed, staring out the window as the city lights faded behind them. The ride was long and silent, except for the rhythmic hum of the tires against the road and the occasional clatter of tools rattling in the truck bed. The further they drove, the darker the surroundings became. Fewer streetlights, more open land, trees stretching into the night like shadows, ready to swallow him whole. Behind them, Gunnar sat rigidly in the back seat, his head resting between the two front seats. His sharp brown eyes never left Rowan, watching him with the kind of quiet intelligence that made the hairs on the back of Rowan's neck prickle. It wasn't just that the dog was big. It was the way he studied him, assessing every movement like he was waiting for Rowan to make the wrong one. Mabel, her hands steady on the wheel, finally broke the silence. "You ever worked a real job before?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like she already knew the answer. Rowan scoffed, shifting in his seat. "Depends on what you call real." He had done plenty of things to survive, some legal, most not. But clocking into a 9 to 5? Never. Mabel didn't react, just kept driving. "Good. Then you won't mind getting your hands dirty." Rowan frowned. He didn't like the sound of that. They turned off the main road onto a long gravel driveway that stretched through an open field. As the truck rolled forward, the house came into view. A weathered old farmhouse with peeling white paint, a sagging front porch, and a rusting wind chime that clinked lazily in the breeze. It looked like something out of a different era, a place untouched by time. Mabel pulled the truck to a stop, cut the engine, and climbed out without another word. Rowan hesitated, then followed, stepping onto the creaking wooden porch. The air smelled like damp earth and old wood, different from the exhaust and asphalt he was used to. He shoved his hands into his hoodie pocket. "So, what's the deal?" he muttered. "I'm your prisoner now?" Mabel unlocked the front door and pushed it open, glancing at him over her shoulder. "No, you're my employee, and if you're smart, you'll act like it." Inside, the house was unexpectedly warm. A fireplace crackled in the corner, casting flickering shadows against the wooden walls. The scent of coffee, old books, and something faintly floral lingered in the air. It was cozy. Not the kind of place Rowan had expected. Not that he'd ever admit that. Gunnar trotted inside ahead of them, circling back to sit beside Mabel like a soldier awaiting orders. Rowan remained near the doorway, shifting uncomfortably. "What exactly do you expect me to do here?" Mabel hung her coat on a wooden rack by the door and turned to face him fully. "You wake up early, you work hard, you don't touch my things, and you don't give me any lip. You do that, we won't have problems." Rowan arched an eyebrow. "And if I do?" Mabel smirked, the kind of expression that made Rowan's stomach tighten with unease. "Then you'll wish the cops had taken you." Behind her, Gunnar let out a low, almost amused huff, as if he knew exactly what she meant. Rowan glanced between them. An old woman and her ex-K9, but for the first time that night, he had the sinking feeling that he was in way over his head. Rowan woke to the sharp sound of barking. His eyes snapped open, heart pounding as he bolted upright. For a second, he forgot where he was. The small, dimly lit bedroom wasn't the back seat of an abandoned car or a dirty alleyway. It was Mabel Lancaster's farmhouse, and that damn dog was right outside his door. With a groan, he swung his legs over the edge of the bed. His body ached from the previous day's work, splitting wood, hauling supplies, cleaning out the barn. Every muscle burned. He hadn't done this much physical labor in his life. Another sharp bark. "All right, I'm up. Jesus." He ran a hand through his messy hair and trudged to the window. The sky was still dark, the first hints of sunrise just barely creeping over the horizon. She seriously wakes up this early? He had no idea how old Mabel was, but she worked like she was half his age, and she expected him to do the same. When he stepped into the hallway, Gunnar was waiting. The dog sat perfectly still, ears alert, staring at him like a drill sergeant evaluating a lazy recruit. "What, you got a damn schedule for me too?" Rowan muttered. Gunnar didn't move, didn't even blink. Rowan shook his head and made his way downstairs, where the scent of black coffee filled the air. Mabel sat at the kitchen table, already dressed in her work clothes, newspaper folded beside her. A fresh plate of eggs and toast sat across from her. Rowan hesitated. "That for me?" Mabel took a sip of coffee and shrugged. "It's for whoever works today. You planning on quitting?" Rowan sighed and dropped into the chair, grabbing a piece of toast. "Pretty sure that's not an option." Mabel smirked. "Smart boy." The morning passed in silence. Rowan ate quickly, still half asleep, while Mabel skimmed the newspaper. Gunnar lay beside the table, his eyes shifting between them, always watching. Finally, Mabel folded the paper and leaned back. "We got a long day ahead." Rowan huffed. "Yeah, what else is new?" Mabel's expression darkened. "Today's different." Rowan frowned. "Different how?" She stood up, grabbed her coat, and tossed him a pair of worn-out work gloves. "You're gonna prove to me you actually want this second chance." Rowan caught the gloves, his stomach twisting. He didn't like the sound of that. Rowan followed Mabel outside, the crisp morning air biting at his skin. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the field. His muscles ached from the past few days of hard labor, but something about the way she had said, "Prove you want this," made his stomach twist. Gunnar trotted beside Mabel, his head high, his movements precise. Rowan had long since learned that the dog wasn't just some oversized pet. He was a soldier, always alert, always calculating. And right now, Rowan felt like he was the one being tested. Mabel stopped near the barn and turned to face him. "See that pile of wood?" She gestured toward a stack of logs by the chopping block. "You split it. All of it. Before sundown." Rowan scoffed. "Are you kidding me?" His arms were already sore from the work he had done the day before. There had to be at least 50 logs sitting there. Mabel didn't blink. "You think life's gonna cut you a break, Carter?" Her voice was sharp, unwavering. "You don't want this chance? Say the word, and I'll drive you back to the city myself." Rowan clenched his jaw. He hated this, being backed into a corner, being given an ultimatum. But what choice did he have? The streets? Prison? With a frustrated sigh, he grabbed the axe and walked over to the chopping block. The first swing was sloppy, the blade barely sinking into the wood. He gritted his teeth and tried again. And again. Mabel and Gunnar watched in silence. Hours passed. Sweat dripped down Rowan's forehead. His arms burned. His hands stung from gripping the axe too tight. But he kept going. He didn't stop. He didn't quit. As the sun began to set, he slammed the axe down one last time, splitting the final log clean in half. His entire body felt like it was on fire, but he had done it. He had finished. Breathing hard, he turned to Mabel, expecting some smug remark, but she just nodded. Not bad. Rowan wiped his forehead. That it? I pass your little test. Mabel studied him for a long moment. We'll see. Then, she turned and started walking back toward the house. Rowan frowned. That's it. Mabel glanced over her shoulder. You think one day of hard work erases everything? No, kid. You're in this for the long haul. She paused. But you didn't quit. That's something. Rowan didn't know why, but those words meant more to him than he expected. As he followed her inside, Gunnar fell into step beside him, no longer watching him like a threat, just like a companion. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the worst place he could have ended up. Maybe, for the first time, he had something worth staying for.